Hello, this is Danny from CG Dreams. Today we're going to be looking at UDIMs. UDIMs within Cinema 4D with Vray. In order for me to demonstrate this, first of all I'm going to explain a little bit about what UDIMs are, why they're useful and when you're likely to use them. Now what you see in front of you right now is an application that I use for my UV unwrapping, and it's called Untitled 3D and it's version 9. It's a fantastic application dedicated to just that. What I want you to focus on right now is the unwrapped model that I have to the left, and you can see here on the right hand side what it looks like. Within this texture space, this single texture space, we've got the whole body, we've got the head, and we've even got the parts of the head, like for instance behind the eyes and inside the mouth. Of course, when you apply a texture map eventually, it's going to be divided its quality between the space that we've got available. So as an example, if we look at the texture map that I generated for this is a very basic one here. What you'll see is that the majority of the space has been taken up by the body. The black area behind is simply wasted space. And of course the space in which the head is actually occupying for pixel space is very little. To demonstrate this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up in Photoshop to show you exactly how many pixel space this head has actually got. So what we're looking at here is the information on the right hand side, and if you're going to be using Photoshop, I'm not sure what version that it changes, if at all, but for me in the window I can show the info F8 key. It probably changed since then because I'm using CS5. Now in the options here, all I have to do is for the panel options is make sure that I've got ruler units to pixels, and the reason for that is if I select everything, Control and A, you'll see here that the texture map size is a 4K texture map. Out of this 4K texture map, I'm going to rectangular select around the head just roughly, and you'll see that the head is actually using 1500 pixels out of a 4K map. So that's 1500 pixels to try to get as much detail in as possible. Now if I was just to copy this and put this in its own separate layer, that is the actual size of the map that we've got. So there's only so much detail that we're going to be able to get in there, although the particular projection that I've got on here right now isn't that great anyway. But either case, this is it. This is viewed at the full size. For really high frequency detail, this is simply no good. So what do? Well, you can obviously go ahead and generate a 8K map. This is a 4K map, so imagine that we've got double the size of this. This will give us, let's have a look, a pretty good decent sized map, by the way, not bad at all. So we'll go to image size and okay, go to actual. So this is the actual size of the face when put onto that UV space layout. So this is the actual size when shown as actual pixel space, how much of this face is actually getting the full detail. Now most of the detail that you're going to see when you're rendering would be the face area. So that's just select this face area here. So out of an 8K map, we've got 1300 pixels dedicated just to the face. Again, that's not really a lot. That's an 8K map, and this is all because we are sharing the single UV space between the body and the face. So the way to get around this is either have two separate UV maps and split your model into different parts, or to keep your model in one single part and use UDIMs. and that is exactly what I'm going to show you now. So back over into Unfold 3D, you can see here that this is the single textured UV space, and this is obviously on a single UV map. What I can do is I can enable the UDIMs, and you can see here that we've got these tiles, and these tiles are basically spaces in which we can distribute our model over. So what I can do is I can select this head, for instance, and I can move it over into this space. Then I can make it so that it occupies the best part of that space. Just bring it away from those borders a little bit. There are other parts to this, like the eyeballs, and let's just move that. So we've got the eyeballs, and by the way, that's behind the eyes. We're not going to leave that much anyway, but just demonstrating this. Let's just drop that, bring that over to there and there. So now what we've got is we've got one single UV map, but we've actually got two tiles being used. Once we've done this, we can then go and start to generate separate textures for one single UV map. Now what I want you to notice is that every single UV tile has got a unique number, and in Unfold 3D you can see this unique tile number is 1000, and the one directly left to the right is 1001, and then to the right of that 1002, and so on. Now you can imagine in really big productions you may have really complex models and you want to get all of the quality with the textures for the whole entire model. Well, you can have many UDIMs, almost unlimited, and each of these UDIMs or these tiles can occupy its own separate UV map, or shall I say its own separate texture map. It's all going to be one UV map but separate tiles, which basically means you could, if you wanted to, for instance, make an 8K map for this UDIM, an 8K map for this UDIM, or even bigger, 15K, and so forth. So this is basically why it's useful to have UDIMs. You can split your model up, having one single UV map, but you can actually have multiple texture maps for that one single model that's got one single UV map, and it occupies the full UV space per texture tile. Fantastic. So when, for instance, for me, when I go into ZBrush, it's quite simple to do. I'm just going to run you through this very quickly. The first thing to note is that when you get your model and bring it in, and let's just close some of these down, shall we? When you bring your model in, the first thing that you normally would do is go and store a morph target. This basically stores its current condition before you start sculpting. What you then do after that is you can then go and look and check your UVs, and let's just click on UV morph, and you'll notice that I've got the head overlapping the body. Now even though it's overlapping the body, ZBrush knows that actually this head belongs to the right hand side. In other words, a separate texture tile. So when it generates the texture maps, it's going to automatically put it to the right position. And it automatically does this, by the way. So that's just come out of this. So all you have to do when it comes to this is obviously texture your model, sculpt it, put as much detail as you want into it, use your layers within ZBrush, and then what you do is you will go up to the Z plugins, and then I normally just dock it to the right hand side, just click on this little radio button, and then we've got this multi-map exporter. And for this example I've just used the displacement and the texture from Polypaint. And because I've been going up and down the sub-D levels after sculpting, you want to make sure that you switch the morph target to its original state. so that when it generates the displacement map, it does it correctly with the correct values. So for this, you've got this switch morph target button, and it automatically does it for you. You would also, in most cases, want to flip the UVs so that they're actually the correct way around when it exports. And this is where you set the size of your map. Within ZBrush, you're limited to the maximum of 8,192 K map, basically, an 8K map. When you're limited to an 8K map, it basically means that you can create an 8K map per UV tile, which isn't half bad. Of course, if you go into a program like Vray, you can go much bigger for that. But in most cases, an 8K map just for the head alone isn't half bad. And bearing in mind, you could, if you wanted to, even separate just part of the face that you're going to be facing the camera to have its own UV tile space, and have the rest of the head have its own separate one. That's if you want to get really ultra close. The only downside to separating your model off like this is that you've obviously got more texture maps to deal with. Another downside when working with ZBrush is that it's a lot of the detail that you put into it, whether it comes from painting or sculpting, is down to how many polygons your model can actually be pushed to. And that depends on your system RAM, your system CPU, and your resources. And what you'll find is you're going to hit a certain peak limit for the whole entire character, and that will be it. You won't be able to push it any further because it's subdividing equally the whole entire model. And some areas may not even need that subdivision. For instance, like the nails, for instance, it's adding more subdivisions to your model that you may be needed. So what you can do is you can actually separate your model up into the separate UV tiles. And the way to do that is to, first of all, apply what's called, and I'll just show you as I'm explaining it, polygroups. If you go to UV groups, I'll just turn on the poly frame. You'll see here at the moment it's just one solid color. If you click on UV groups, you'll see here it's now turned to two separate colors. And what this enables you to do is quickly isolate one group from another, either to work on it for sculpting or to split it into two separate subtools. I don't want to go into too much detail because really this is about Vray, but this is all part of the workflow if we're using ZBrush. Obviously you would want to split it off, and this is where you would use the split command and then group split. And then what you'll have is you'll have a separate subtool, one for the head and one for the body. This means that you'll better subdivide the head. In my particular case, I can go to 21 million polygons, whereas the whole entire body with the head, I can't go any further than 31 million polygons distributed to the whole lot. So there are some limitations there, and the biggest limitation with splitting them up into subtools is that you can sometimes get a bit of a border edge around the displacement map area. But I don't want to go too far into that side of things. Once you generate your maps, they're going to look something like this. And by the way, that's to show you a couple of the settings before I go any further. So we've got our multi-map exporter. I've selected displacement texture from Polypaint. I've gone for like an 8K map or 4K map. It's up to you. Flip. I wanted to switch the morph target to the original state that it was imported at. I'm not going to be going for a 32 bit map because really there's no need to in this exercise, but if you're going to be making an 8K map, then you might want to put the best detail in which case you would want to use the 32 bit. And there's a separate video for that I've already done, I believe, on this, so I won't go into that. You've got options specifically for like the displacement, as you can see there, and that's really all of it there is to it. Once you've done this, you may want to change the naming convention, especially if you've got the model in one whole piece like this. And you see file names? Well, if you just click on this, keep on clicking on it until in the end you'll see this option UDIM. And what it will do is it automatically add a special number sequence to each of the texture tiles. So as I mentioned in Unfold 3D, we've got 1000, 1001. Generally, however, and the same for Vray, it starts off as 1001, 1002, 1003, and so on. So we'll move on straight into Vray. So in Cinema 4D, I've got the character loaded in here. I've got two materials that I've applied to the character, and the first material is the displacement map. So let's go about working with this. Let's just look at the textures as well. So here are the textures. We've got the body and head as two separate displacement maps, and we've got the body and the head as two separate color maps. What you'll notice in each of these is, well, there should be anyway, obviously couldn't have had that turned on at the time, but there should be a UDIM number. I'll just show you it. It's actually here. See that? 1001 and 1002. You also have exactly the same for the displacement map. Now, if in the case you're working with separate subtools, the chances are each subtool is going to have a different name to it. And by default, ZBrush will name each of these maps accordingly. So for instance, if you had a subtool called head and a subtool called body, then you'll be seeing here body DM such and such and such. And then you would see head DM and so forth. You cannot do this or use this type of naming convention within Vray, because with the UDIMs, it's using for the same name convention, but one difference, the only difference that should be in the name convention is the UDIM number. So you can see here, this is exactly how it should be for us. We got exactly the same information in there. The only difference really is that we've got the 1002. And you can see here that we've also got this other information in here, okay, that may cause some problems when Vray is looking for the other map, because it's looking for the same file name, and in this particular case it's done it correctly. You can see there. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to get rid of some of this information so that the files remain exactly the same name other than the UDIM. Otherwise, Vray will ignore it. It will ignore the second map. Okay, that's it. So that's set up for us. Just checking. Yep. So to use a UDIM, what we have to do is, first of all, in the displacement material, we have to go to the texture, we go to the Vray bridge, and then load in the advanced bitmap. When we click on the advanced bitmap, we want to make sure that the blur is on 0, color space to linear. If it's a 32-bit displacement map, you want to have negative colors, but I'm not going to go into the 32 displacement information on this. And then finally, we want to load in our displacement map. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for my texture, which is the 1001, which happens to be the body. I'm just going to drag and drop that in there. You notice that when I drag and dropped it in there, that it got rid of the full field in there. In other words, we haven't seen the full address as to where the image is located. This is because I've already put the textures into what Cinema 4D recognizes as a native folder, which is called TEX for textures, so that it knows that it's in its root directory for the project. And this is why we see it here. What we have to then do is we have to just rename this part where the UDIM is, the 1001. So we just delete this. We use a bracket, which is normally the shift and the bracket key. It is on a UK keyboard anyway. And then we type in all uppercase UDIM. This is a string that tells Vray to use UDIM. Once we've done this, we can then just hit enter, and then what it would do is it would go off and look for another file of the UDIM order. In other words, 1001, 1002, and however many more tiles there may be that you've used. And that's really it. Now I'm just going to go back now, and I've just already set up the amount in here that I want it to be displaced, and whatever amount it is that is to be displaced has to have the half of the negative value. So I found that for this particular displacement map, a 1.5 centimeter was fine for me. So I'm going to just copy this. I will paste it into here, just put the minus before it and paste it, and then if you just do the right hand slash, that means divided by, and then you press 2 and then enter, and what it will do is a half the value. And then what it basically does is it sets it up perfect for a 16-bit displacement map, or an 8-bit. Yeah, it'd be an 8-bit displacement map, I believe. Not quite sure, I didn't really check that. But anyway, generally if it's not 32-bit, you would need this shift of half the value of the amount that it's actually being displaced by. Now that we've done that, you have to make sure that your subdivision surface is turned on. I don't use global parameters, so I use view dependent, and I will set the edge length, which determines the quality of the subdivisions, how many subdivisions it's going to go down to, and the maximum. And the quality I would generally put down to around about 1.4. It depends on how low of a polygon model you're importing. With that done, we should then be able to go and see the displacement. And I'm going to just disable the hair for the minute, so that we just don't see it in there. We go a little bit closer, and then we go for a quick render. As you can see here, we've got all of the nice detail that I added before I just done this quick demonstration. The next thing is to do exactly the same thing with the other shader. So I'm just going to bring this in front of the displacement so it shows on there. And this time we've got the AL surface, and I'm going to go into the diffuse, and for the map I'm going to go and do the same thing, the advanced bitmap. We're just going to click on here, and then we're going to go and load in our first one, the UDIM 1001. Just drag and drop that in there. And we'll just rename this exactly the same as before. So bracket, UDIM, and then the right bracket. Hit enter, and then it will load that in. I also need to go to the color space in this particular case and go to sRGB. And then we'll go for a quick render with that. Sometimes in the viewport, when you do this kind of render, it doesn't always work until you actually do the final render. So we'll let that cook for a minute. It'll just progressively get better and better. Of course, if it comes to a point where you've already done all your texture mapping and you've done all of your work, and then you decide, do you know what, I want to upgrade this model, I want to have more texture space for the head, and then you need to follow a certain procedure if you're using ZBrush, and that would be is to have two versions of your model. You need to have one version of your model which has got the UDIM UVs, and then the original version of your model. What you want to do with the original version of your model is to, before you apply the new UVs, bring in the texture maps and then apply them. I'm just going to quickly show you this. What you would do is you would load in your texture maps for your original model. And then with your original model loaded in, you'll have the old UVs obviously. And you want to store your morph target as you did before. Go to your texture and import your old textures. Once you've imported your old textures, you want to go and subdivide it many times as you need to, and then load and select that texture so that it applies it to the model. With your model subdivided, what you want to do is you want to click on this button here which says Poly Paint from Texture. By doing this, it's going to apply the texture to the poly paint or the polygons, and it's no longer relying on the UV data. Do exactly the same for all of the maps that you've previously been using, for instance all your specular maps or your displacement maps and everything like that. Store your displacement maps in your layers, or shall I say store your displacement maps in layers, and then apply your new UVs afterwards, and then project your new displacement maps with the new UVs. So as long as you applied your high frequency detail to the model itself and it's not relying on any maps, you can then bring in new UVs and then reproduce brand new maps. So for instance, what you see me do here is I've got my model subdivided so many times, and then I click on Poly Paint from Poly Groups, or shall I say from Texture. Once you've done that, you can then turn your texture off. At the moment it's relying on the texture, so I'll just go Poly Paint from Texture. Make sure that your model is subdivided high enough. Store your morph target, subdivide it high enough, just going to do it a few times to show you, and then click on Poly Paint from Texture. It's no longer using the texture. Now go down to the lowest sub D level, and then what you do is you go to Tool, Import, and then import the new UV model, and it will update this model. When you go to then produce a brand new map, it will produce a brand new map based upon the new UVs. So that would be the scenario if you were to go ahead and make your project, produce all your maps, and then think to yourself, do you know what, I should have used UDIMs. Obviously by doing this you're not going to have any better maps because you're using your old maps, but what it will allow you to do is allow you to go in there and add more detail to those maps on top of the detail you've already got in there. But generally you want to sort of decide from the very beginning stages, am I going to want to have high quality maps? If so, do your UDIMs within the UV mapping right away, and then you won't have to go through the process of what I've just shown you of converting all your data, your poly group data, or should I say your texture data, into your poly paint, and importing your displacements. For instance, like this displacement map here, you would have to subdivide your model, import your displacement, your original one, go to displacement, and you would select it. I don't think I've got one there. Yes, I have. There we go. You turn the displacement on, and it requires that you do have a texture map turned on as well. Then you turn mode on, and then what you do is you increase the intensity and then click apply. And then what it will do is it will apply the detail back to your model, and then you can bring in your UV model and then reproduce brand new displacement maps upon the new UVs that you've imported. Another way you can do it as well is if you just wanted to just bring in a model, just import it manually. Let's just say you've imported it. You can go to your plugins, which is up here. I've just docked them to the side there, and you can load in up your UV master, and you can copy the UVs from one of your models and then go and select your model that you want it to go to, and from the plugins you would go paste, and then it will update those UVs. That's another way that you can do it, and you may want to do it that way if, for instance, there was a problem with resizing your model when you go to import to update the UVs. But other than that, that's really it. That's how you use the UDIMs within the Vray and Cinema 4D, so that it will basically use multiple textures for one single UV map, which is obviously on different islands. I hope you found this useful, and please do leave some feedback, and if you have any questions, about the procedure or about some of the things I've previously touched on about the workflow, then please do ask away, and I'll try my best to help. Okay, well, I'll leave that now, and I will see you soon in another video. Bye for now.